terrorism prevention, and more. 5, reassigning DOJ law enforcement officers as well as Homeland Security investigators to focus on immigration instead of investigating issues like cargo theft, terrorism, and human trafficking. The list goes on. And I don't believe that these issues, law enforcement or addressing cargo theft, should be partisan in any way. Crimes in our freight supply chain harm consumers, small businesses, transportation workers, and our economy. But I'm sorry, but I just can't stay quiet about the dismantling of our federal law enforcement during a hearing where our witnesses rightly will ask for increased law enforcement response to issues at hand. Well, just know it's being attacked right now. Ultimately, to solve this issue, I believe we actually need to fund the police and not follow what the President Trump is doing in defunding the police, like my state troopers in Michigan and others across the country. We need to make sure that we have the people, from field agents to prosecutors, in place to deal with these complex international cybercrime happening in the freight supply chain. And this just can't happen if the attacks we're seeing at the Department of Justice continues. And I would urge my colleagues across the aisle to join me in defending our law enforcement personnel. I also know the solutions to rising cargo theft go beyond law enforcement. In the direct jurisdiction of this subcommittee, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing from witnesses about the types of actions that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration can take to crack down on criminal organizations impersonating motor carriers or brokers to defraud shippers as well as to steal goods. I also know that the FMCSA will need resources and direction from Congress to do this, and I hope that we can work across the aisle to make that happen, especially as we begin discussions of the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. And finally, once again, I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, for your contributions to the critical national supply chains that really literally form the basis of the American economy. I look forward to your testimony. Thank you again for being here. I yield back.
Well, thank you for your opening statement, Mr. Peters. We will get to our very distinguished panel momentarily. I would just, in response to your comments, your emphasis on criminal activity and making sure we enforce the laws of the land, certainly well received. I do wish I had heard more from my colleagues over the last 4 years when the take care clause was consistently not observed by the President of the United States. We had a weekend at Bernie's for 4 years when the President failed to enforce our border security. Now we are left with international criminal elements who have permeated this country and dealing with the after effects of that. So perhaps we can work together on that, issue. I think the people of Michigan registered their opinions, as did Indiana, that we need to secure our border. Joining us today is Chief Will Johnson, Chief Special Agent at the BNSF Railway Police Department and Second Vice President of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Prior to joining BNSF, he was the Chief of Police in Arlington, Texas for 8 years, and he's been a police officer for 31 years. Chief Johnson, you're recognized for 5 minutes, and thanks again for being here, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Young, Ranking Member Peters, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today on this important issue. As mentioned, my name is Will Johnson, Chief Special Agent for BNSF Railway, and I appear before you today in my capacity as Second Vice President for the International Association of Chiefs of Police. The IACP is the world's largest association of law enforcement executives. Today's testimony reflects the concerns of many police executives as they combat organized cargo theft in their jurisdiction. The facts are stark. Strategic cargo theft in the trucking industry has increased 1,500% from 2022 to 2025 and accounts for 33% of all cargo theft reported by CargoNet. The Association of American Railroads estimates that over 65,000 thefts occurred in 2024, representing a roughly 40% increase over the prior year. In many of these cases, suspects endangered the public by sabotaging rail safety equipment so that they could commit their crimes. Regardless of the mode of transit, cargo theft cases often cross multiple state lines, making jurisdictional coordination, prosecution, and data collection extremely difficult. The lack of a coordinated federal cargo theft enforcement effort hinders effective prosecution. And food shippers have reported that criminal tampering with chain of custody seals for U.S. food shipments has put the nation's food security at risk and also caused inflationary food prices. Finally, there are frequent reports of armed suspects engaging in violent takeover-styled robberies or shooting firearms during the commission of these burglaries. In short, cargo theft is not a low-level property crime. We generally observe three distinct suspect profiles in the commission of these crimes. Number one, transnational organized crime members. Two, loosely organized criminal street gangs in urban areas. And three, criminal opportunists. Despite the challenges that each of these offenders represent, police officers continue to make significant arrests. In my submitted testimony, I outlined 4 recent examples for your review. The nature of these crimes have evolved over the years, and a whole-of-government approach is required to address this challenge. The IACP does not believe that we have all the answers to this complex problem, but we urge this subcommittee and the United States Congress to consider the following 8 action items as a starting point for stakeholder engagement to find effective solutions. Number 1, we support the establishment of a federal supply chain crime coordination center and supply chain fraud and theft task force to address cargo theft in all aspects of the supply chain, to direct funding to dedicated federal prosecutors to tackle cargo theft cases, to modernize the FMCSA vetting process to include stronger authentication methods, real-time carrier verification, and implement controls around the sale or transfer of DOT and MC numbers. Increase criminal penalties for cargo theft cases and allow all victims' aggregated harm to be considered in these offenses. To encourage public-private partnerships between corporate security teams, carrier monitoring services, load boards, insurers, and law enforcement through data sharing initiatives, and allow the prosecution venue to be established at the place of offense and also at the victim's U.S. corporate place of residence. This would allow for improved prosecution and reporting efforts. To provide law enforcement agencies with the resources to support investigations into this complex and sophisticated criminal networks. And finally, while the United States Customs Border Protection has implemented changes to inbound shipment processes, there is a further need to ease the burden on crime victims by allowing CBP the authority to waive regulatory fines when cases are proven that theft had occurred. Again, the IACP stands ready to work with this committee and the United States Congress to develop and implement these solutions and to continue to raise awareness on this important issue. I'm happy to answer any questions now or at the end of all testimony.
Thank you, Chief Johnson, for that testimony, the recommendations associated with it. We will most certainly have some questions for you. Our next witness is Robert Howell, Senior Vice President and Chief Supply Officer for Academy Sports and Outdoors. Academy Sports operates 298 stores in 19 states and 3 distribution centers in Texas, Tennessee, and Georgia. Mr. Howell brings 25 years of experience in supply chain management. We are grateful to have him here. Mr. Howell, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Young, members of the committee and subcommittee, for the opportunity to testify to you today on the critical topic of cargo theft. I'm Rob Howell, Senior Vice President, Chief Supply Chain Officer for Academy Sports and Outdoors, and in my role, I'm responsible for distribution in both domestic and international logistics. Academy is a leading sporting goods and outdoor recreation retailer headquartered in Katy, Texas, a suburb of Houston. We employ approximately 22,000 members across 298 stores in 19 states, including Texas, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. We also operate distribution centers in Texas, Tennessee, and Georgia. We were founded in 1938 in San Antonio, and today Academy offers a broad assortment of outdoor apparel, footwear, sports and recs products, including leading national brands and a portfolio of private label products. Academy's mission is for us to provide fun for all, and we fulfill this promise through a localized assortment and the value that connects a broad range of customers. During today's testimony, I hope to increase the awareness of the impacts of cargo theft. Organized cargo theft is rapidly growing and broad-reaching, impacting supply chain networks both on the road and on the rail. Like many retailers, our goods are first shipped from a point of origin to our distribution centers through an interstate network. This allows us to efficiently move merchandise and equip our stores with the products families want at a competitive price they appreciate and when they need them. In my 25 years in the supply chain, I've never seen cargo theft this prevalent, and there's been a dramatic increase in the last 2 years. These types of thefts include load interception, identity theft, double brokering, and cyber fraud. There's a robust cargo theft network comprised of bad actors who demonstrate increasing levels of sophistication. In the past, cargo theft typically represented as a bad actor stealing a truckload or duplicitously obtaining a DOT motor carrier number. In today's environment, it's rapidly progressed, and it's common to experience cyber theft of online credentials and systems, perpetrators that cut doors on trucks so they don't break the security seal, stealing the product, fraudulently editing transportation documents, reattaching those doors all in one transaction while eluding prosecution. Recently, we had a shipment of what we call private label swimwear. It was intercepted on its way from Nevada to our Texas distribution center. As you can imagine, this is critical at this time of year for the season. Unfortunately, we had to react when that load was stolen and repurpose and reposition product throughout our network. You can imagine that takes incremental costs, incremental transportation, but we had to get this product available for our customers in time for the season. If we didn't get that product there, not only would our customers not be able to get that product they need, but we risk losing that customer's loyalty and losing that relationship with that customer. Apart from the cost of lost merchandise, this also results in additional cost on us, shipment delays, and ultimately that impact to the consumer. This type of theft impacts a variety of stakeholders. Third-party service providers, brokers, and carriers are attentive to the issue. When products are stolen, we are notified by these third-party providers, and they launch investigations, engage authorities, and activate their mitigation teams. We then seek financial restitution for the cost of goods. It results in lost sales for our companies, but can also be reflected in increased costs for more secure transportation. Additionally, we've had to intervene and make investments, tracking and tracing technology, GPS, as well as enhanced cybersecurity to protect the delivery of secured information. Cargo theft also disrupts how we operate our business. In addition to the impact on merchandising, inventory management, and distribution center teams as they work to replace the stolen merchandise, it also creates a need for additional time and resources to pursue the exploration and implementation of additional in-house solutions. Most importantly, though, once again, cargo theft impacts the customer. When goods are stolen in transit, we lose that individual sale, potentially that customer and the ability to build loyalty long-term. This issue is exacerbated by the fact that some goods are seasonal, limited time, or limited availability products, and we cannot easily replenish those goods. These lost sales can reduce sales tax revenue for the local communities we serve. Partnering with the industry leaders, like the Retail Industry Leaders Association, enables us to stay on top of best practices to help protect academy sports and outdoors. There is a need for greater support to inform coordination, communication, with collaboration among local, state, federal agencies, as well as the private sector to mitigate the impact of retailers, brokers, carriers, and customers. Thank you for the opportunity to share our experience, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And our next witness today is Adam Blanchard. Mr. Blanchard is principal and CEO of Tanager Logistics and Double Diamond Transport. Mr. Blanchard founded his companies in 2014, and he currently operates 90 trucks and employs over 20 freight brokers. Mr. Blanchard, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator Young. Subcommittee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Adam Blanchard, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Double Diamond Transport and Tanager Logistics. Our trucking company was launched following a conversation I had with a close friend around my kitchen table. We put our first truck on the road in 2014, and we formed our brokerage shortly thereafter. Like most small business owners, we face daily challenges, Yet we were blessed with an exceptional team. Together, we persevered and built a company that everyone in our organization can be proud of. We created dozens of jobs in the San Antonio, Texas area, and today we operate about 90 trucks and 280 trailers. About a year ago, our American dream turned into a nightmare when some unscrupulous criminals stole our identity. By capitalizing on our good name, they tarnished the reputation we had spent over a decade to earn. The scam worked like this. Posing as Tanager Logistics, the criminals brokered loads to unsuspecting motor carriers who delivered their cargo while the scammers pocketed the money. In just one example, they diverted a full truckload of energy drinks with a retail value well over 6 figures, over 1,000 miles from Texas to California. Because they spoofed my company's emails, the drivers was tricked into believing we had made the request for the transportation of that load. While the criminals were using our name to enrich themselves, we were playing whack-a-mole, trying to counter their sophisticated techniques to mimic our website, emails, and operating authority. Even at this very moment, 2 Tanager Logistics are listed on the FMCSA's official website, my company and an imposter. We provided this evidence to FMCSA, but they refused to take it down. Simultaneously, we were on the receiving end of misdirected rage from motor carriers who had also been scammed. Through no fault of our own, we were blacklisted by factoring companies for fraudulent invoices and non-payment to those motor carriers. We sought to report these crimes, but kept hitting dead end with the federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. My insurance company wouldn't get involved because technically we didn't have any cargo claims. The Texas Department of Public Safety informed us this wasn't their jurisdiction. The FBI recorded our information but never returned our call. The Department of Homeland Security met with us but refused to investigate. We did our due diligence, but the message was clear. You're on your own. We might be on our own, but we are far from alone. Cargo theft is rapidly becoming a crisis, costing the industry up to $35 billion annually. Strategic theft has risen 1,500% since the first quarter of 2021. The average value per theft is now over $200,000. Cargo theft comes in many forms, whether it is imitating a legitimate company, pilfering goods over time, breaking into parked tractor trailers, or double brokering fraud. These are complex, multi-jurisdictional crimes, often involving organizational theft groups, yet there is no unified, dedicated federal response. Thieves, emboldened by the lack of investigations and prosecutions, are growing the size and sophistication of their theft operations. But there are a few common sense steps we believe Congress can take to counter this. First, direct FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, to remove illegitimate carriers and brokers from the SAFER website. The industry should be able to trust that SAFER publicizes only legitimate entities so that we can make informed decisions when vetting business partners. Second, pass the Safeguard Our Supply Chain Act, which would establish a federal task force dedicated to cargo theft. Third, pass the Household Goods Shipping Consumer Protection Act, which would strengthen penalties against bad actors and protect consumers. Currently, criminals view trucking as a low-risk, high-reward target. We must invert that calculus. When we were finally able to contact the thieves who stole our identity, the mere threat of law enforcement involvement was enough to deter them. The bad news is, if they're not scamming us, they're scamming someone else. Trucking is a tough business, and we have no shortage of grit and determination. But our industry is not equipped to deal with organized theft groups on our own. We need help from federal agencies and law enforcement with the resources and advanced technical capabilities, to take this on. We implore Congress to provide resources and direction to pursue criminals who are exploiting small businesses that families have spent years, decades, or even generations to build. Thank you for the opportunity to be before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchard. We will look forward to posing some questions. We're sorry about your troubles. You did a great job of personalizing those and making those real to us. Our final witness, Louis Pugh, is the Executive Vice President for the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Before joining OIDI, I got it That was close, right, Mr. Pugh? Mr. Pugh was a truck owner-operator for nearly 23 years, and he earned the Million Miles Safe Drivers Award. Mr. Pugh, you are recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Yes, Chairman Young, Ranking Member Peters, and members of the subcommittee. I am Louis Pugh, the Executive Vice President of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. I have over 30 years in the industry. Nearly 23 of those prior to working at OOIDA was being a small business trucker. And with those years, I accumulated about 2.5 million miles of safe driving. And prior to that, I was a truck driver in the United States Army and still hold my CDL to this day. OOIDA is the largest national trade association representing small business truckers and employee drivers. We have approximately 150,000 members who cumulatively own about 240,000 pieces of equipment or operate. OOIDA's mission is to promote and protect the interests of our members and any issues that impact their safety and success, which increasingly includes freight fraud. In trucking, freight fraud is so easy to commit, it doesn't even take a savvy or experienced criminal to pull it off. As you can tell from this panel of professionals, everyone from shippers, motor carriers, brokers are vulnerable targets. Often the perpetrators of these crimes are based internationally, far beyond the reach of the American enforcement agencies. While these cases of physical theft occurring within our industry, most of the problems small business truckers face involves being scammed by fraudsters or swindled by unscrupulous brokers. There's several factors contributing to this recent explosion in freight fraud: weak freight rates, overcapacity. We've had increased competition, leading to greater susceptibility among small trucking businesses. Advanced technology and lack of federal oversight and enforcement has also created an environment where fraudulent actors can thrive. Unfortunately, small trucking businesses are both the most vulnerable to fraud and the least likely to be able to recover from it. Most commonly, motor carriers are held responsible for the loss of the cargo due to fraud, with costs ranging from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars per incident. Several OIDA members have lost their entire business after falling prey to the single case of freight fraud. This is not a hyperbole. It only takes one scam to completely ruin a small trucking business. Fraudulent activities include double brokering, criminals posing as legitimate brokers, rerouting schemes, identity theft, purchase of authority by fraudsters, and more. Truckers are doing all they can to protect themselves, but they are limited in their capabilities. For example, an OOIDA member doesn't have the resources to identify most of the sophisticated scammers. They lack the authority to ensure brokers are complying with existing transparency regulations. While there are systems in place that can help combat fraud, the federal government is struggling to provide support to shippers, motor carriers, and brokers as needed. The first step Congress must take to improve this condition is passing Senate Bill 337, which is a bipartisan legislation introduced by Senators Fisher and Duckworth. This bill, which is supported by a wide variety of industry stakeholders, gives the Federal Motor Carrier Administration the authority to level civil penalties against fraudsters. It also requires brokers to register with a physical address. This is something carriers have had to do for years, and it's a minor change that could have a major impact on protecting motor carriers. Congress must also use its oversight to ensure existing programs can help prevent fraud are better prioritized. This includes improving FMCSA's National Consumer Complaint Database, or NCCDB, which OOIDA has advocated for years. Congress must also support regulatory efforts that are currently underway, such as insurance compliance with the broker bond requirements and creating a new registration system. Additionally, if FMCSA fails to produce a final rule that ensures compliance with existing broker transparency regulations, Congress must compel the agency to do so. Since I began my testimony, a small business trucker has likely fallen prey to fraud that could jeopardize their entire business. That's how commonplace freight fraud is becoming in trucking. We believe we have identified several critical steps Congress and FMCSA must take to weed out fraudulent actors, and look forward to working with these and answering your questions throughout the hearing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Pugh. You bring an important perspective to this hearing and a sterling safe driver record. Truckload freight, we know, is overwhelmingly the primary target of fraud. 98% of respondents identify truckload freight as the most vulnerable mode. This subcommittee oversees the FMCSA, and I'd like to better understand how bad actors are acquiring US DOT numbers, MC numbers, and other business identifiers to carry out their illicit schemes under the guise of legitimacy. Mr. Blanchard, in your opening statement, you described how a bad actor posed as Tanager Logistics to steal shipments, even added their counterfeit company to the FMCA Safety and Fitness Electronic Records, or SAFER website, to appear legit. Can you describe how bad actors are able to insert themselves so easily into the supply chain? Maybe elaborate on that, please.
Yes, Senator Young. They're able to do this now through a whole multitude of ways. We have experienced everything from what I stated in my testimony, where they are spoofing our emails and otherwise representing themselves on behalf of our company. There are instances out there now where individuals are actually purchasing MC and DOT numbers on a black market. That is a major issue that we have to address, and the FMCSA must do a more efficient job, in our opinion, of ensuring that they go through those companies that are authorized to transport freight in the United States and remove those that are illegitimate.
Do you have any visibility into how these purchases that you referenced might occur? Is it the so-called dark web? Are there individual criminal agents who will visit people in person and make the transactions, or do you know?
My understanding, Senator, is that this is occurring on various websites. So I don't know if that is necessarily happening on the dark web, but it's certainly there on different platforms that are available on the internet.
I don't even know exactly what the dark web is. It's just this furtive thing, right? We all hear about. So, for the record, all right. Do any of our other witnesses have any visibility into how those transactions are made? If not, then
just one other point that might add to that is we have seen instances where companies that are going out of business, they actually auction off their numbers similar to how they would auction off equipment that they're no longer using.
Yes.
So individuals could buy this number through a business liquidation process and then already have an established footprint, and then assume illicit operations under a previous legitimate. That's just one example that I've heard from the field.
That's an important contingency for us to keep in mind. Thank you. Well, back to Mr. Blanchard. When you approached DOT about the fake Tanager Logistics company that was listed on the SAFER website, what did they say? It seems puzzling to me that they wouldn't remove the fictitious one. And so what did they say?
When we reached out to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Senator, they informed us that unless there is a third party or another group out there that is actively using our MC or DOT number, that they did not have the ability to investigate any further into this other company that was representing us. The concern I had, Senator, with that is that we provided them the information that we knew at the time. First is that the individual that was behind the other Tanager Logistics, from our investigation, was determined to be somebody from Africa. We also did some investigation, both internally and through our attorneys, that determined that the address that was listed on the SAFER website that's provided by the FMCSA was a residential address in Ohio of a woman that had no affiliation to logistics whatsoever. And so—
And you thought those overlap of facts looked suspicious?
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, we did,
Okay.
Senator, because
Right. I can understand that.
And to be fair to FMCSA, there are many instances in which you have companies with the same name that have operating authority in the United States. And so certainly we're not here to interrupt that or ask the FMCSA to involve themselves. But if there are facts sufficient to provide them enough information that there is very likely an active fraud situation going on, we believe it would be very helpful for Congress to direct them to do so.
I want to get to my colleagues' questions momentarily, but let me just sort of get to where I hope we end up with many of these lines of inquiry, which is what should Congress consider to ensure FMCSA is equipped to root out rampant fraud, better support legitimate motor carriers and brokers? You listed off a number of things, but maybe you could connect what we've just discussed to a solution or two.
Yes, Senator. What is, in my opinion, very important is to provide the directive and resources as needed to the FMCSA in order to increase their cyber capabilities. One issue that we've seen constantly is that they are falling further and further behind the sophistication of these criminal organizations. We've even had an instance in which our profile on with FMCSA was hacked and somebody changed our address and phone number in an attempt to engage in another fraud that fortunately we had stayed on top of to prevent. But FMCSA needs to be the group that quarterbacks a unified federal group of agencies and law enforcement groups in order to address these issues, in order to create a database and a repository of data so that it can be coordinated appropriately amongst not only federal law enforcement, but state law enforcement, and also increasing that cybersecurity that they have to prevent these kind of things from happening.
That strikes me as reasonable and bipartisan and something, you know, even Senator Peters and I can work together. I'm just kidding, Senator Peters. We are actually really good friends, believe it or not. Would any of you like to add to Mr. Blanchard's suggestions about what we can do to address these situations? I know you offer recommendations in your statements, but a situation like Mr. Blanchard's, do any of you have additional thoughts about how we can address that and equipped FMCSA to be more helpful or other authorities?
I think the question of venue is particularly important.
Yes,
so, as an individual who has focused on the providing services to victims for the better part of 30 years, it's really disappointing to me to sit with esteemed colleagues that have really been victimized and had no way to have resolution.
Yes.
A lot of that is happening because of the venue of where the offense is happening. And because this freight is inherently mobile, crime scene identification, venue where the offense took place is difficult at times to establish. So expanding venue to also include the location where the business resides could help strengthen communications within the criminal justice community, both local, state, and federal, to help businesses more effectively report challenges that they have to bring those grievances forward to the court.
Right. There's clearly not a lot of clarity when every law enforcement entity, FBI, locals are pointing to someone else, right? So we need to, that's our job. We have to help clarify and facilitate interstate commerce. And okay. Senator Peters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just as an example of how we are friends and we work together, the chairman has taken many of my questions, and I'm not mad at him at all. I think it just shows that we're like one mind. It's like, you know, minds that think alike. So
right.
We definitely Midwest nice too, and common sense. For the record, Midwest common sense, right? Agreed. Mr. Pugh, in your written testimony, you described how the burden posed by cargo theft can really threaten safety generally across the board. Would you want to talk a little bit more about that, how this is a safety issue in addition to a fraud and theft problem?
Yeah, this is a huge safety issue for truckers and small business and all, because if they're not getting paid, they haul loads, they still have to pay for fuel, they still have to pay for maintenance and these type of things. So if they haul a load for X amount of dollars and they have all these expenses, and trucking's a very slim profit margin business, very slim profits. So when something like this, they get beat out of, $3,000 to $4,000 and they're planning to use these for maintenance repairs and stuff like that, it puts an owner, operator, small business guy like I was into a point where you have to start deciding, can I stay in business? Am I able to keep my truck to meet the safety regulations? And the long and short of it, can get so bad that they will end up having to close their business and sell your truck. And what the real safety aspect of this is, most small business owner operators have 20-some years experience or more. So you're taking a well-trained, experienced trucker off the highway, which is the people we should be keeping, not losing.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Mr. Howell, I think we can all agree that we continue to face affordability crisis in this country. And cargo theft obviously is a direct harm to those who've invested in those goods. And when they're stolen, the loss is very clear. But perhaps you could describe to this committee how cargo theft also contributes to increases in prices really across the board. This is a problem that really everybody in our country faces, and maybe give us some quantification of that, but everybody in our country should be concerned about this problem. Is that accurate?
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member Peters. At Academy Sports and Outdoor, we pride ourselves in being a value retailer. So we're really always focused on how everything we do affects the individual consumer and those families that are buying our products. When it comes to cargo theft, the number one concern we have is, it's a rapidly growing issue. So over the last 2 years, it's really accelerated. You've heard numbers quoted by others, 40, 50%. We're seeing similar numbers. I think second to that, the second most concerning issue is we've actually never recovered any of the cargo that's been stolen, I can speak to in the last year. And to the best of our knowledge, nobody's ever been apprehended or caught in any of the incidents we've been involved with. So it's a growing issue. So to your point, it is driving costs throughout the entire supply chain. So as part of my job, we've got to find more sophisticated partners that can try to manage this freight more effectively. We're tending to move off of brokers and onto more asset-based carriers, as we call them. That way, we know the individual driver, we know the equipment that it's actually picking up. It doesn't always prevent the crime. We also have to handle double handling. We have to manage sometimes double transportation in our own network to recover when products are stolen. So obviously, all of these costs add up to the supply chain. You heard my colleague at the OOIDA, they are handling freight they never get paid for. A lot of cost, I'm sure, with the transportation teams and trying to fight for their own identity. All that ends up rolling up to us as we have to move freight. Our costs are getting higher. Considering it's relatively new, I can't tell you exactly how much is going directly to pricing, but if this continues at the rate it's going, absolutely those costs will have to be borne in future price increases.
Right, yeah, thank you. Chief Johnson, in cases of inbound shipment, cargo bypasses the port of entry inspection and travels closer to its final destination before undergoing required inspection by Customs and Border Protection. I'm the ranking member of Homeland Security overseeing Customs Border Protection, and very interested in how we can make sure that they're dealing with some of these challenges. Your testimony mentions the additional harm that's inflicted when cargo theft occurs prior to the CBP inspection. So if you could please, for the committee, detail specific and additional risk associated with theft of inbound shipments, and what actions do you believe that Customs and Border Control could take in order to work with the supply chain to reduce this type of crime?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. First and foremost, when you're talking about CBP inspections, it's important to also think about Homeland Security investigations as the investigative authority beyond just the inspection process. And so whether the shipment is cleared at the port or it's cleared at a location closer to destination, once an inbound shipment is attacked and that seal is broken, we really have three risks. Number one is we know what was declared in that load, but there had not been an inspection process. And so just from a shipment integrity perspective, that is a point to reflect on. Two, having greater engagement from HSI in the investigative process whenever there is a in-bond shipment seal breach. So presently, the regulatory functions kick in where the shipper is responsible for any regulatory fines because that shipment arrived at the facility without its bonded seal. But there's no complementary criminal investigation from the federal government on what happened in that process. And so the shipper is ultimately victimized twice. One, their product is stolen while it's being shipped, and then second, they're facing a administrative process to have those regulatory fines reviewed. Presently, CBP has shared that they cannot consider waiving those regulatory fees until after the citations have been issued and then the victim responds in an administrative process. And so there's really a lot to unpack in that, in the complexity of those in-bond shipments, but we know that there's a fair amount of cargo proceeds that are currently under bond that are being targeted by these transnational organizations.
Right, thank you. That's something we'd love to work with you on, to try to unpack that more and figure out how we can do things better. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Pugh and Mr. Blanchard, for referencing my bill. I appreciate you doing that. Appreciate the support for the bill. I think it's extremely important that we get that to move. It's the Household Goods Shipping Consumer Protection Act that I've introduced with Senator Duckworth. And as you know, it would allow the FMCSA to impose those civil penalties against the unauthorized brokers, and it would require companies of in the household goods sector to establish a principal place of business to prohibit that fraudulent companies from skirting those existing regulations. I'd like to thank you also for bringing up suggestions on what else we can do to be able to combat this. It's eye-opening. The amount of money harm to companies, but also to consumers when we add all this together. So thank you for that. Chief Johnson, in your testimony, you referenced jurisdictional concerns that often arise when investigating cargo theft crimes. And I believe it's particularly important that local and state law enforcement agencies have the support of the federal government when dealing with crimes that pertain to interstate commerce. In your experience, what is the relationship like between law enforcement and agencies like the FBI and the HSI when investigating cargo theft that crosses state lines?
Ma'am, the short answer is they are good relationships. The challenge is not necessarily with the relationships, but the capacity of organizations to be able to balance or juggle the myriad of threats that they're faced with. Cargo theft historically has not risen to the same level of attention as maybe some other competing interests have for these federal entities. Also, it's important to understand how those agencies prioritize the work within their AOR, or area of responsibility, and that's largely a local decision by local executive leaderships for those agencies involved, absent some sort of national direction coming out of headquarters or the Attorney General's office. I think for this topic, national direction, either authorized by Congress for the task force that we've mentioned previously, or prosecutorial direction coming out of the Attorney General's office, directing all of the United States attorneys to prioritize this issue and focus resources on effective prosecutions, will aid in the assistance of bringing these cases forward.
Thank you. You know, Mr. Blanchard, you spoke about your frustration in trying to just bring it to the attention of authorities, federal, state, I assume local as well, that you were trying to work with. And when you mentioned some of your suggestions, I know Mr. Pugh wanted to chime in, so I'll let you chime in now, on what needs to be done. And it's not, I don't think it's just throwing more money at being able to have more enforcement out there necessarily. I think it's also to be able to put some teeth in what we need to do here and just have more awareness. But what would anyone on the panel, but we'll start with you, Mr.
I'd be
Blanchard.
happy to
Would
start,
you-
Senator. And again, thank you for your support of our industry and your introduction of the Household Goods Shipping Consumer Protection Act. I think that's certainly a great first step. As I have come to understand, Senator, is currently, to piggyback off of Chief Johnson, the current threshold that's established by the United States Sentencing Commission for the DOJ to interdict in cargo theft cases requires at the instant to be at least $1.5 million in losses. So the average loss in a cargo case is around $200,000 today. So therefore, to reach that threshold of $1.5 million is going to require law enforcement agencies to be directed to look into the continual criminal activity of these organizations to meet that threshold, or for Congress to otherwise change that and create a new directive in order for them to start pursuing these through a unified task force, which is something that we have included in the Safeguard Our Supply Chains Act, which has not been filed, but certainly would appreciate any member of this committee to review that bill, and the willingness to author that and would be fantastic.
We'll review it.
Yeah, and that would provide the coordination between agencies and law enforcement. And I think really, Senator, this begins with the FMCSA. And to further elaborate on Senator Young's question earlier in terms of the FMCSA, we have to start with them. I think to your point, Senator Fisher, throwing money at the problem, I would agree, is not the solution. I think first we need Congress to direct FMCSA on the things that need to occur and the coordination necessary to address this very issue that we're dealing with. They need to be able to distinguish between fraudulent businesses and legitimate businesses. DOT needs enhanced cyber capabilities and real-time fraud detection tools and greater interagency collaboration with law enforcement to identify these frauds. FMCSA needs to be directed to remove fraudulent companies from the SAFER website. We rely on that heavily in order to vet companies that we work with. They need to explicitly authorize FMCSA needs to explicitly authorize to withhold registration from applicants who fail to provide verifications. Also, Congress, we believe, should conduct rigorous oversight of FMCSA's transition to a single U.S. DOT number, which we believe they're going to do in the future or considering doing without placing undue burden on legitimate carriers. And DOT should expeditiously implement the 13 recommendations issued by the Government Accountability Office to strengthen FMCSA's National Consumer Complaint Database. And so those are things we believe that Congress could do without the necessity of additional funding in order to provide the coordinated effort necessary for law enforcement, because we simply don't have the tools, Senator, to be able to do the reverse IP searches, to break through the cyberspace in order to find who's spoofing our emails. I have a very sophisticated IT director, and he's great, but only law enforcement agencies have that capability.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, can I ask for Mr. Pugh to be able to respond as well during the
Please,
time?
yes, go ahead.
Since both you and Senator Peters went over time, can I keep?
You are correct.
Thank you, Mr. Pugh.
Go ahead.
And thank you for your support, and
Please.
OIDA as well.
I thank you, Senator Fisher, and you and Senator Duckworth on your bill. We very much appreciate that, and glad you're trying to do something different and to help these things. It will pay dividends if we can get it across the finish line. A couple other things is then this whole National Consumer Complaint Database, it seems to be FMCSA needs to be directed more to do something with that. From our experience and with our members, and we tell members to send these complaints plus many other complaints that happen to them in trucking. It seems like this is where all complaints go to die at FMCSA. Usually they hear nothing back, or if they get anything, it's just, hey, thanks for letting us know. Also, we've said for a long time, it would probably be helpful to have a different name. Most of our small business people and truckers, they don't even realize that this is a place for them to go file a complaint, because National Consumer Complaint Database, who would think that's a trucking complaint hotline? So that would be helpful. We feel FMCSA probably has enough funds to do some investigating on this. It's just to reallocate where they're putting, because they continually say that there's not a safety effect to this, so that's why they don't have to do anything with this. But we know there is, because it's putting people out of business, it's causing people not to be able to maintain their equipment. So there's definitely a safety thing here. Plus, you know, who knows what happens to a trucker if something happens at gunpoint or something like that. And I would agree with my colleague here. FMCSA is the first line of defense on this, 100%. They have all this information. They have everybody's registrations and all that. And finally, I would say FMCSA needs to step back and take a long look of making the barrier of entry into being a motor carrier or a broker much harder, much stricter. We pretty much let people file for insurance, pay for it. We don't know who these people are, have no idea if they even know what they're doing, and maybe 12 to 18 months we audit them.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pugh. All these concrete and actionable recommendations has been very helpful, I know, to all of us up here. Mr. Lujan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chief Johnson, my state is home to a number of land ports, including Santa Teresa Port of Entry, which is a multimodal transit hub that has been a major site of economic growth in recent years. At Santa Teresa, we're experiencing trucking thefts on the Mexico side of the border, meaning the materials and products businesses and consumers are waiting for never make it into the United States. Chief Johnson, yes or no, do you believe it's important for the U.S. law enforcement to coordinate with Mexican law enforcement?
Absolutely.
The Department of Homeland Security has estimated that cargo theft accounts for up to $35 billion in losses annually. These thefts impact our truckers and railroads, agricultural producers, businesses big and small. They also impact consumer prices, which are currently on the rise. Mr. Howell, yes or no, when the entire industry experiences regular thefts of merchandise, does it affect the prices that consumers see on the shelves?
Senator, yes, it eventually will.
Chief Johnson, you noted the following in your testimony, quote, state-level police and prosecution efforts are challenged by a tremendous number of competing priorities for resources, such as addressing the fentanyl epidemic, violent crime in the community. This focus has either directly or indirectly impacted effective property crime enforcement efforts. Criminals have exploited this vulnerability. Do you believe law enforcement needs more resources or less resources to address the full slate of challenges in our community?
Well, certainly local law enforcement needs more resources directed towards this issue. And as we look at the three offender profiles, certainly the transnational organized crime has got the greatest federal nexus. But when you drop down to the criminal street gang profile and the criminal opportunist, those are most directly targeted by local law enforcement efforts and state charges, and certainly having the capacity in communities to be able to address cargo theft-related crimes at a local level with state charges would be tremendously complementary to the federal response that's been discussed today.
So, Chief Johnson, having fewer law enforcement officers could make this worse? Having fewer law enforcement officers at the local level could make this worse?
Absolutely. Currently, IACP has experienced and reported on just a national challenge in recruitment and retention in policing. Surveying our members, we believe that across the nation, many agencies are experiencing a 10 to 15% vacancy rate in terms of positions that they have available but are unfilled. And we need to aggressively, as a complete society, focus on improving the opportunity to recruit and retain police officers into the profession to strengthen the safety and security of our communities.
Appreciate that thorough response. Last week, before the Senate passed its budget resolution, I introduced an amendment to provide increased resources for local law enforcement through such initiatives such as the COPS hiring program. I was surprised when only one of my Republican colleagues voted for it. This is a bipartisan area that we should be working together to make sure that there is more resource available to ensure that we're able to hire, secure, keep, and recruit all the folks that we need. So I appreciate that response. Mr. Blanchard, advanced technology is one of our strongest tools in the fight against drug trafficking. which is why I've long advocated for 100% screening using non-intrusive inspection technology at the southern border. Yes or no, do you believe we should implement NII technology at our land ports of entry?
Yes, sir, I do.
Reports indicate that fentanyl precursor chemicals are being smuggled through the United States transportation networks as well, including through cargo and rail, before making their way to Mexico for fentanyl production. Yes or no, would implementing comprehensive screening of all cargo, both entering and exiting the United States, enhance our ability to detect and disrupt this supply chain?
Senator, we don't do much cross-border freight, but certainly we have always, as an industry, been very supportive of more inspections, so long that it's not overburdensome. And I think without question, the new technology and the technologies that you have mentioned provide increased efficiency with advanced throughput on those inspections. And so I personally, I certainly would not feel comfortable speaking on behalf of my entire industry, but myself and on behalf of my company, we would welcome that. We want to get the bad actors out of our industry, and I think any advanced technologies that would provide assistance to law enforcement in that effort, I would be very supportive of.
I appreciate that response, acknowledging the importance of technology that's not going to slow down commerce, but it's going to let us get a 100% view of what's leaving the country with some of these precursor chemicals that are rolling through the United States and then going to Mexico, or the bad stuff that's coming in. I'm always surprised with the very low number of passenger vehicles that are actually screened entering the United States. And reports coming out of the Department of Homeland Security suggest that 90% of the fentanyl that is being found in the United States is coming through the southern border in passenger vehicles driven by Americans. We've got to stop this stuff, and the only way we're going to be able to stop it is that we can see what's in those vehicles, but make sure that people can also move so we're not hindering commerce. Mr. Blanchard, one final question. The importance of the work that's needed to ensure that we're keeping an eye on the bad folks and that there's actually something being done when it comes to the federal staff, experts, things of that nature, to be able to implement the law, to hold people accountable, to prosecute, things of that nature. Will that require more staff or less staff?
At this time, Senator, I'm not in a position to know whether we would need more or less staff, and let me explain why I say that. The reason I don't know if there is sufficient law enforcement as we sit here today is because there has not been any directive by Congress to assign agencies to look into these cargo thefts and cargo fraud issues. And so I am of the personal belief, Senator, that first we really need Congress to direct these agencies to start investigating these. That's why we have the Safeguard Our Supply Chain Act, to direct these agencies to work in coordination to begin to investigate these claims so that we can start prosecuting and convicting these bad actors out there. Because currently, from what we can tell, they are going essentially without any recourse whatsoever into these criminal activities. And so I certainly believe we should start there, but I think it would be very logical that as we begin that process, that the gravity of this situation and the severity of what we are experiencing in the industry likely would require some additional resources for some of these federal law enforcement agencies in order to be able to tackle this issue.
I appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your acknowledgement of many of the ideas that have been shared today alone, in addition to the research staff has done in this space. This is something that Congress needs to get done, and we can work together on this, whether we're looking at just domestic transport or we're looking at international crossings as well. We have to do better in this space. So very much appreciate this hearing that you scheduled. Thank all the panelists for being here today.
Thank you for your questions, Senator. I agree, this panel's been outstanding. You know, I'd like to read into the record some just compelling staff work that I think needs to be read into the record related to international organized crime and the nexus they have with the very challenge that we're discussing in this hearing. Law enforcement investigations have found international criminal organizations have strong ties to Eastern Europe and South Asia. For years, large-scale theft rings have been linked to Armenian gangs. who use a mixture of straight and strategic cargo theft to steal freight. One stakeholder reported their load was stolen by an Armenian gang operating in California and then resold to a Colombian crime ring. Additionally, reports indicate an organized crime ring from India, referred to as the Singe Syndicate, is operating in both the U.S. and Canada, all using the name Singe. In 2023, Canadian officials conducted an investigation dubbed Project Big Rig that disrupted the operations of this crime ring by arresting 15 individuals running a major cargo theft ring. Canadian authorities recovered over $9 million in stolen goods. It goes on and on. They have presence in Ohio. Investigators have also found ties to the Mexican cartels in cargo theft rings. On January 13 of this year, over $440,000 worth of Nike shoes were stolen off of a BNSF train whose air brakes were cut as it traveled on tracks north of Phoenix, Arizona. Federal officials have linked this activity to a cartel operating out of Sinaloa. 11 men were arrested. 9 of the men were in the United States illegally, and the other 6 are residents of Sinaloa. BNSF reported that these tactics of cutting brakes and forcing trains to slow down have increased over the past 2 years. So I just find that connection compelling. Sometimes I like to connect the work that we do in this committee or in particular subcommittees or committees with some of the conversations we have in other committees. This is very much linked to border security in various ways. I would also note that my colleagues' emphasis on resources is important and in many cases correct. I would say if we're going to look holistically at this challenge, we should also look at the limitation we have on federal judges, so that if you do identify bad actors, you need to be able to get into court over a reasonable period of time and not wait years and years and years to have your case heard. Otherwise, the law is of little effect. So we've got some work to do. The Judges Act is neither here nor there, but it was vetoed, for those who are checking your recent record, by our last president in the final days of his administration for what seemed to be purely partisan and vindictive reasons. Are there any additional connections to international cartels that our witnesses feel like we should be making, or any reflections you have on that issue that you would like to get on the record? I'll ask Chief Johnson.
Thank you, sir, for the opportunity, and I'd like to compliment staff's research that was read into the record with one additional point of clarity. I'd like to thank the men and women of the BNSF police force that are on the front lines every day challenging these bad actors, and those arrests that you referenced were the result of their hard work and connecting federal authorities to their investigations. And so I'm very proud of the work that they're doing to protect the U.S. supply chain and also our customers' goods and services. The concept of the organized crime and transnational organized crime, I think, has been well covered. The Mexican national nexus for rail freight is the strongest. Eastern European, certainly Armenian in the trucking industry, very pronounced. And having the ability to have a federally directed task force with the United States Attorney's Office is the only way that we're going to be able to peer into those organized networks and dismantle the command and control that is taking place, because the cops in the field, they can keep arresting the bad actors every day. Until we take out the command and control elements of these organizations, this crime threat is going to persist.
Mr. Blanchard.
Senator Young, to expand upon Chief Johnson's comments, and again, I would reiterate, I thank your staff and the rest of the senator's staff on the diligent research they did. There are things that you just stated into the record that I was not even aware of, but One thing I wanted to reiterate or to bring to this committee's attention is that because these actors, these organized criminal groups are acting with impunity because there is no real law enforcement effort to stop them, I would feel certain that this is a crime that is occurring. Cargo theft is something that is generating a tremendous amount of revenue for these criminal organizations that are then in turn engaging in other criminal activity. And so I think it's important to make that point, because this seems to me to be a moneymaker for these bad actors that I am sure are engaging. If they're engaging in cargo theft, they are certainly engaging in other criminal activity that is impacting our communities.
Right. This is probably one of many streams of revenue for these criminal elements. Point well taken. Mr. Pugh.
Yeah, my staff takes a lot of these calls from our members calling. With 150,000 members, we get calls weekly on this. And we have seen, and we're sure that some of these folks are from other countries, you know, like I said, stretching on our border, some domestic. We have seen, we had a lot of people in the beginning that were in a certain area of Southern California, kind of north of LA. There's a couple counties there that this was being traced back to. And since then, we have found and uncovered where these bad actors, like there'll be 8 or 10 of them using the same address. They shut down, they come right back with another address, the same address with another. And so I'm sure this is being, like I said, both foreign and domestic.
Well, we have come to the end. We've covered a lot of ground. I would welcome any additional submissions or points that you wanted to make. You could submit those to the committee in writing. We can keep the record open for a short period of time to accommodate any of that. But my hope is that we will take your recommendations and see where we can come to some measure of consensus, and then act on those recommendations. That can sometimes be challenging up here, but this is, I would agree with Senator Peters, this is one of these issues that lends itself to common sense and action right now, and the American people deserve that. So senators will have until the close of business on Thursday, March 6th to submit questions for the record. And the witnesses, I am informed by our very diligent and competent staff, have until the end of the day on Thursday, March 20, to respond to those questions for the record. This concludes today's hearing. The committee stands adjourned.